Fish believe tells are magic, while small winners laugh and say they're worthless. But the killers, you know, the guys at the top of the poker food chain, they also believe tells are magic. It's almost like the midwit meme in real life. I believe live tells are real. They're not your foundation. No, you still need a solid system, but they are a multiplier for your win rate when you know which ones to trust. I've made over 7 figures playing poker, and these tells were a big part of my edge. Now, we don't guarantee results or promise income claims. We just pass down the exact lessons our top students are using to crush games right now. I've cataloged over 40 tells, broken down by what players do, how they buy in, how they handle their chips, their timing, and what players say at the table. Today, I'll show you what they mean, which ones actually matter, and exactly how to weaponize these tells against anyone in your game. Let's jump in. All right, we're gonna start with what players do, beginning with how they buy in, what it means, and what inferences you can make. First, if you see a player who's always topping up their chips, always trying to keep the maximum on the table, for example, say the game is a 1.5K cap game and they lose a pot for $100 and they immediately put $100 back on the table. What would we think about this player? I would think it is much more likely that they are a reg or a pro. They are probably more likely to be aggressive, more likely to value bet thinly, more likely to empty the clip with bluffs. My exploits against this type of player would be actually to kind of dial back the exploits and do some softer exploits. Not saying I would try to play balanced or equilibrium or whatever. I would just try to dial it back, not treating them as a drooler, treating them with a little bit more respect. And my exploits would be more, what does my range want to do against this player, rather than what does my exact 2 cards want to do against this dummy. So in general, treat them with a little more respect until proven otherwise. Next, if you see someone buying in for less than the maximum in the game, I would immediately treat them as a fish. So I would be exploiting them hard right away. I wouldn't be thinking about what does my range want to do? Do I have the nut advantage? Whatever. I would just be thinking, what do my 2 cards want to do against this particular player in this situation? I wouldn't worry about playing defense, wouldn't worry about playing balance. I would just try to exploit them as hard as possible until they show they're capable of fighting back. All right, next, you see a player buying in with big chips. So they pull out, you know, $1,000 chips out of their pocket to buy in, or a 5K chip out of their pocket to buy in. Much more likely, again, to be a reg or a pro. I would treat them with slightly more respect until they show us something that they don't deserve that respect. But in general, I would just think much more likely to be a reg or a pro if they're buying in with big chips out of their pocket or pouch or backpack or whatever. Next, this one isn't necessarily about how they buy in, it's just how they take their denominations of chips. So basically, if you see a player who's buying in with all $5 chips in a 2-5 game, for example, he buys in for 1,000 and he gets 10 stacks of $5 chips, this player much more likely, in my opinion, to be a fish. Generally, most pros are going to be buying in with a mix of big chips and smaller chips. You're not going to see pros buying with 10 stacks of $5 chips, right? So much more likely that this player is a fish. Treat them disrespectfully with the exploits until proven otherwise. Next, you see a player buying in with all $20 bills, buying in for 500 or 1,000 or whatever, but they're not using hundreds, they're buying in with $20 bills. This player much more likely to be a fish. And from what I have seen, your mileage may vary. When they buy in with smaller denominations of bills, this is counterintuitive, but I've seen they're much more likely to be kind of splashy, action, fishy type players rather than the more passive, nitty type players, especially if they're buying in for more than the minimum. Again, so I would treat this player type relatively disrespectfully, playing offensive poker. And when I say disrespectfully, I don't mean like say, hey man, you're a big dummy. I don't mean like disrespectfully in person. I mean about how you're playing poker, right? You want to exploit them disrespectfully. You don't want to assume that they're going to adjust to simple strategies. That's what I mean by treating them disrespectfully. Basically, you're playing offensive poker where you are just thinking, what do my 2 cards want to do against this dummy? That is disrespectful, rather than playing a more balanced form of poker. That's all I mean by that. All right, next, buying in with all $100 chips. Much more likely to be a reg or a pro. In general, I would kind of dial back the exploits, treat this player with a little bit more respect until proven that maybe they don't deserve it. But here, much more likely to be a stronger player when they're buying in with the bigger denomination chips and no smaller denomination chips. All right, so those are the tells on what you can glean from how they buy into the game. This next list of tells is actually crazy, and I usually save the most valuable stuff like this for our Basecamp. Basecamp is our 5-day intensive where we rebuild your game from the ground up, pre-flop, in position, out of position, and it's all based on 50,000 hours of real data. And I want to be completely transparent. It is only for players who are already taking the game seriously, players who are playing 20 plus hours a month and tracking their results. So if that's not you, it's probably not a fit yet. And after those 5 days of intensive training, you've got 2 months of continued support to make sure you can actually implement all of these new strategies in your game. And look, a lot of the smartest players eventually figure this stuff out by trial and error, but we look at ourselves as kind of a fast forward button. Basecamp just helps the right players skip all of that wasted time of trial and error and get to where you want to go in poker much, much faster. All right, the next set of tells, and these are crazy, these are very, very valuable, timing tells. So let's jump into it. All right, the first one, the quick pre-flop peel. So if you see players do something like this, they peel the cards and immediately put them down. This is very, very polarized. And what does polarized mean? Well, it means they either have a very, very strong hand or a very, very weak hand. It's human nature, kind of. If we're looking down at pocket aces or pocket kings, we don't want to set off alarm bells to anybody else at the rest of the table. So like we peel, we put that down really quick so as not to draw attention to ourselves. And if we have a really bad hand, like 7 deuce offsuit or whatever, well, again, quick peel, put it down. We don't need to look at it for a long time to know it's a shit hand and we're folding. This is really, really valuable because a lot of times when opponents do have the middle of their range, when they have a hand like Jack 10 suited or pocket eights or something like that, they often do a much longer peel to figure out, oh, okay, I've got Jack 10 of spades, or I've got pocket eights and they're both red cards, whatever. So they often, when they have the middle of the range, look at the cards for at least a few seconds or double check them. And when they have the very top of the range or the bottom of the range, it's a very, very quick peel and put them down to try to be incognito. And again, just like most of the advice we give out here, I would recommend playing offense instead of defense when you are looking at your cards. So what does that mean? Basically, I like to look at my cards. As soon as those cards come from the dealer, I'm looking at my cards. I'm not waiting till the action is on me. And again, this is because I want to play offense. As soon as I look at my cards and know what I have, now I can spend my time looking at other players at the table and watching for this tell. So again, if you see that quick peel, maybe after you open and then they go for the 3-bet, just beware that this could be the very, very top of their range. Again, not definitive, but it is another clue that is very, very useful. All right, next, and this is the corollary, kind of the long pre-flop peel. So kind of look at the cards, they hold them up, and then they put them down. Just like we talked about before, this kind of means middle of range. They're not really gonna have the top, they're not really gonna have the bottom. Let's say you open, someone 3-bets you see them do kind of this long 4 or 5 seconds staring at their card pre-flop peel, and then they put in the 3-bet. In general, they're probably gonna be more near the middle of their range than the very tip top. Again, not definitive, but I found this one is very, very useful for getting a few extra pieces of information. Next, when you bet on the flop or turn and your opponent snap calls. In general, I found when they snap call, we can kind of eliminate the top and the bottom of their range. What does this mean? Well, basically, when they snap call, they have kind of an easy decision. They didn't have to think about raising. They didn't have to think about folding. It's probably not going to be the nuts. It's probably not going to be garbage, right? They got a very easy decision with like a flush draw, a straight draw. They're just going to call, or they've got some type of thin value marginal hand, like maybe a weaker top pair, a stronger middle pair. They're squarely at the middle of their range. They didn't have to think about raising. They didn't have to think about folding. Next, when they snap bet after the nuts change. So let's say they are first to act, they have bet on the flop, and now the flush comes in on the turn, bringing in a 4-card straight, and now they snap bet again. This is very, very polarized, meaning it is very strong hands like the nuts, or pretty much nothing. Because if they had a hand in the middle when the flush comes in, if they had a hand like top pair or 2 pair or a set or something like that, they would at least think about it. They would at least pause and at least spend a second, like, do I want to value bet here? If so, what size do I want to go? So this is very, very polarized when they snap bet after the nuts change, meaning they're either going to have very, very tip top of range or air. And basically, when someone is polarized, our adjustment, we shouldn't be doing a whole lot of raising. We should be doing a lot of calling, because let's say we've got a strong hand, but we don't have the nuts. Well, they either have the nuts or air. If they have air, we want to let them keep betting. So with our strong hand, we don't want to raise. We'd like their bluffs to keep betting. And if they have the nuts, well, just piling in more money right now, probably not ideal for us, right? Only kind of exception to this is if we are on the river, and let's say we get to the river with 6 high or 8 high or something like that. In general, when our opponents are polarized and and I have air, sometimes a very, very profitable play can just be min clicking, because if our air is worse than their air, well, they're gonna fold out all their air. And if in the situation we actually do have the nuts when our opponent is polarized, our raise size should be absolutely massive. So again, a lot of calling when they are polarized, but when we do have the nuts, our raise size should just be egregious, because if they have value, like the second or third nuts, they're never folding, and if they have air, they're folding if we breathe on it. So in general, when they are polarized, lots of calling. We want to be huge raise sizes with our nutted hands, and we want to be clicky small raise sizes like 2x, 2.2x with our bluff hands. The next one, when they tank for quite a while, 15, 20, 30 plus seconds, and then they check on the river. This is usually going to indicate weakness, right? Because they're trying to present that, hey, I've got a decision here. Do I bet? Do I check? What is actually going on here is they don't want you to bet. They don't want to call a bet. They want it to seem like they had a decision. So usually when they go for this big tank check on the river, their range is going to be a little bit weaker. They're not going to have the top of their range. What does this mean for us? When we have bluffs in the spot, great spot to empty the clip. When we have value, we're going to have to size down because their range is just weak and really can't withstand heat when they give off this timing tail. All right, next, let's talk about the final category of things they do. And this time, let's talk about things they do with their chips. All right, when they line up all their chips exactly, so the sides of the chips are all perfectly lined up, in general, this is going to be a much tighter player. This is going to be a nit. The chips aren't moving around. They've got time to line them all up perfectly. They're not going to be splashing around. In general, this is going to be a nitty player. If they start putting money in, they are probably much more likely to have it. Don't pay them off. Also, just my opinion here, I don't like bluffing nits as much as I like bluffing loose players, and this is kind of counterintuitive, but the reason why I don't really run the bluffs or empty the clip nearly as much versus the nitty players is in general, is because their range is just too tight to begin with. Their range is too strong to begin with, and if they're getting to the flop, if they're getting to the turn with a range that is too strong, well, that means to have profitable bluffs, we're going to have to get them to fold very strong hands, and in general, people don't like folding strong hands, especially when they've waited 6 hours to finally get pocket kings, right? So in general, I actually tone down the bluffing against nitty players. All right, the corollary to this, if the chips aren't even stacked, they've just kind of got big, messy, sloppy piles anywhere, much more likely to be an aggressive action player, much more likely to run bluffs, would be much more likely to give this type of player rope and call down a little bit lighter. And this type of player in general will get to the river with wider and weaker ranges. So if they are deep, this may be a better player than the nit, actually, in my opinion, to empty the clip against, because I feel pretty good about making players fold weak hands on the river, and they'll get to the river with a lot of weak hands, where I don't feel all that good about making players fold strong hands. So you see a player with big kind of messy piles everywhere, in general, more action, give them a little bit of rope, bluff catch a little bit lighter, and maybe you could run some more bluffs yourself against this type of player, because they do tend to get to the river with wide and weak ranges. All right, next, let's say you bet and they kind of throw their chips aggressively towards you to call. In general, this is kind of the opposite thing, right? This is just weakness. This means they kind of have a medium strength hand, a draw. They don't have top of range. They don't want you to continue betting, or at least putting in big bets. So this is just a simple, they are trying to seem strong when they are actually weak. And the opposite of this, when they put in the chips very, very discreetly, they kind of put them away from you when they put the chips into the pot. This is just the opposite here. This just means they could have very strong hands. They would like you to continue putting in money. Again, I wouldn't take these as gospel, but we can kind of stack all of these pieces together and each one kind of adds up on its own. I don't know what that means, adds up on its own. All right, this next one is gold. I promise this one is really, really good. All right, so let's say you grab a stack of chips to bet on the river, right? And you see them defensively grab chips like they're about to put chips in the middle, like they're about to call whatever you bet. This is gold. This is so good. This means 99% of the time that they don't want you to bet, that they have a very weak hand. So how should we adjust here? If we see a player do this kind of defensive posturing where we grab chips, like we're counting out chips like we're about to bet, and they grab chips like they're about to call, basically, if we have value here, we need to size down. The reason why they're doing this defensive posturing is they don't have a hand that can withstand a big bet. So if we have value, size down even smaller than you think, because they are most likely going to fold. So you need to give them a really good price. Also, if you were considering bluffing, this just means you can't really run into a brick wall here. They're almost never going to have a strong hand when they do this. Go even a little bit bigger with the bluff size, because when we need to be kind of careful with bluff sizes is when they do have strong hands, when they have a brick wall that we can run into. Well, when they do this defensive posturing, they just almost never, ever have the very tip top of the range, which means we're just going to be able to get a range fold in the situation. So when we're bluffing, just go big, because we don't need to be efficient if we're never going to run into a brick wall. A bluff that is 15% too small in this scenario is going to be infinitely more expensive than a bluff that is 150% too big, because if they're folding 99% of the time, you may as well just put in the most amount of chips possible in the spot to make sure they never call or almost never call. This one is gold. It is really, really good and reliable. All right, the next is the cousin to this one. It's the corollary. Say they are betting on the river and we are thinking about calling. Say we're cutting out chips for a call and you see them across the table like kind of hold their cards up like this, like they're about to flip them over if we put in the call. Again, this is defensive posturing. This just means they do not want us to call. So I would be much more willing to bluff catch light in this scenario. And if we were thinking about raising, if we do have value in this particular situation, make sure that raise size is going to be small, because they have a very, very, very weak range. Most likely they are bluffing. Most likely they have a missed draw. So give them an opportunity to spaz, because most likely when they do this, they have absolutely nothing. And if we do have a bluff catcher, very, very good situation just to put in the call when they're doing kind of this defensive posturing. And kind of one thing to add to these last two, if you're about to do an action and your opponent is basically doing something to try to encourage you to do the opposite thing, that means whatever action you're about to do, they don't want you to do it. So consider that. I think that's kind of a great way to sum up these last two, some of the most reliable tells we're going to talk about today. All right, to wrap up the tells and the things players do at the table, let's go to our miscellaneous category that doesn't really fit into any of the previous three, and let's go through these one by one. All right, first, when they look away from the board when the card is dealt. So say the turn card comes out and your opponent immediately looks away or looks down or something like that, that is much more likely to mean that that card smacked them, that card improved their hand. Right? Because again, it is kind of like what we talked about, the pre-flop timing tell, where when people kind of peel their cards and then immediately put them down, they don't want to be caught looking at it. When they immediately look away, much more likely that that card has positively impacted them. They don't want to give anything off. And subconsciously, because it has helped them, they want to look away so as not to draw attention to themselves. Corollary to this one, when the turn or river card comes out and they're just kind of staring at it, again, much less likely to have helped them. This card probably neutral for them at best, or it's a card that they don't like if they're just continually staring at the board after the flop, turn, or river has come out. Next one, they have their significant other sitting behind them. In general, this is just going to be a fish. 99% of the time, we can just treat them disrespectfully with exploits. This is a little bit less reliable, so I wouldn't lean on this too much, but in my experience over years and years in general, the players who do tend to have their significant other sit behind them, they tend to be actually slightly more risk averse, a little bit more on the tight, nitty side. Again, your mileage may vary. This one isn't 100% reliable, but just what I've noticed over the years. Next, if they show their hand at showdown, even when they don't have to, basically their opponent flips over the winning hand because their opponent has to flip first, and then they just kind of show their hand as kind of like, look how much I got screwed in this spot. This is just going to be a fish 99.9% of the time. A reg or a pro is just going to smile and say nice hand and muck the cards. They're not going to look for consolation from the rest of the table. So again, you see this, kind of treat them disrespectfully with exploits. This is going to be a fish. Next, if they get up to go pee, smoke a joint, give somebody a smooch across the room, whatever, they come back to the table and they wait to post the big blind, particularly if they're in late position, like the cutoff or something like that, they wait to post the big blind. In general, just going to be a tighter player, a little bit more on the nitty side, a little bit more risk averse in general. The next is kind of the step up to this. Not only do they wait for the big blind to come back around, But say you're in a game that's playing with a straddle, right? Everybody is straddling, everybody is participating, and I see this player type a lot. They wait for the big blind to come around, and then they don't post the straddle, they just post the big blind. And in general, this player is going to be on the nitty side. They're going to be a fish 100% of the time. They're going to be bad at poker. This type of player, they're either completely oblivious or they just don't give a shit, right? And this type of player in general just going to be a fish 99.9% of the time. Treat them disrespectfully with exploits. Finally, if they get up to take a walk or go smooch somebody on the other side of the room, they come back to the table and they just buy the big blind. They don't wait for it. In general, this type of player probably going to be a little bit more on the action side, much more willing to value bet thinly, much more willing to bluff. Again, not 100% accurate, but we're stereotyping here. We're going off tells, so here you go. Finally, let's talk about things players say at the table and what this means. And I've got a bunch of these, so let's run through these rapid fire style.
Ace-king is a drawing hand.
Well, in general, if they're not saying this ironically, they are going to be a fish. They probably open too tight. They 3-bet way too tight. When they 4-bet, it's almost always going to be aces. Treat this player as a tight, nitty fish.
I hate pocket jacks. I don't know how to play them.
Again, going to be a fish. We want to use hand incentives against this player, basically meaning, what do my 2 cards want to do against this dummy? Do not give them any respect poker-wise whatsoever. I guess in real life, they could be a great person. Give them a lot of respect in real life. But the play style you play against them, treat them very, very disrespectfully. So let's say you're considering bluff catching someone and there's a flush out there and the board is paired and they say something like,
well, I don't have quads.
If they're eliminating a value combo from their range, a lot of the times this just means they have a very strong value hand, because if they're comfortable eliminating value combos, making it more likely that they are bluffing, this just means strong. They are strong.
Well, I guess I got a call. I'm at the top of my range.
This is going to be a solver fish, someone with a subscription to a solver who doesn't know how to use it, doesn't understand how solvers work, doesn't understand how to node lock. In general, my biggest exploit against this player type, let's say I have kind of a thin value hand on the river, maybe top pair, decent kicker. Well, oftentimes I will take kind of my mergy hands against this player type and completely polarize against them. Say go 2x pot, 2.5x, 3x pot with just top pair, because this type of player type, they are the most incapable of adjusting. They see situations like this as binary, either nuts or massive bluff. They've looked at a few solver outputs. They think they're a genius. They may hero you down. So I like to kind of merge my value range and just use these kind of huge polarized appearing sizes, because they just can't fold hands when they have good unblockers and good removal. So that's the exploit against these guys.
If you bet, I'm gonna call.
If you bet, they're not going to call, unless you use an egregiously small size. Again, this is defensive posturing. They do not want you to bet. They have a hand that can't withstand heat, usually medium to weak showdown value. So if you're bluffing, empty the clip. Always here. They're just almost never going to call. And if you have value here, make sure to size down even a lot smaller than you were previously intending upon. They just don't want to call. They're telling you they don't want to call, right? So small with value, size up with the bluffs. Pretty easy here.
Be careful.
This just means I don't have a good hand. Please don't bet too big.
Well, I guess it's time to go home.
I have a very strong hand. Please put in more money and pay me off so I can double up.
Well, you either win a small pot or lose a big one.
I don't bet thin, I underbluff, and I am a fish.
I check blind.
I am a fish.
Dealer, can I get a wash?
I am a fish.
Dealer, I'm gonna tip you before you deal the turn and the river.
I am a fish.
Would you have called if I went all in?
I was never planning on going all in. I just want to make sure I did the right thing, and also I am a fish.
Show one, show all.
I am a super nit. Never pay me off. I always have it.
Anyone want to do a round of straddles?
I am action. I am good for the game. I am capable of bluffing occasionally.
It was ace-queen with the queen of spades or nothing.
Go huge for thin value against me because I don't understand anything. Be efficient with your bluff sizes because I get sticky against massive sizes, and also I am a fish.
Screw you, dealer. I can't believe you dealt that river.
I am extremely emotional and play completely based upon my mood. When things are going well, I am in lockup mode and I am a nit. If two things go poorly, all of a sudden I begin to spaz and hemorrhage chips like crazy. I am also a fish.
Look at that sweet baby there.
Watch out. I'm pretty good at poker. All right, guys, if watching this video made you realize you can't read players quite as well as you thought, that's exactly the gap we close inside Basecamp. Basecamp is 5 days of live interactive coaching built from 50,000 hours of real data, plus 2 months of support to make sure everything sticks. It's designed for serious players who want to win more and who want to do it by actually exploiting the pool of players that they're playing against every day. All right, guys, hopefully you enjoyed this video and it turns you into the biggest boy possible. Thank you guys, and have a gentle day.